on my end.
Okay, so I think we're at the very end of the Mishnah. We didn't do this last part. So, continuing in the discussions of Pigel, Hashochet, Asa Mukdashin. So you're shechting the animal, but you have in mind to eat the sholil, to eat the fetus. You want to go eat the fetus. So that's not something which is generally eaten. Oh, or alternatively, you want to eat the shilya. I saw a translation is the placenta. In the article that translates afterbirth. I don't know how you eat an afterbirth. Sounds like a concept. Is that a real thing? Called afterbirth? The placenta?
Yeah, the whole thing.
The whole is called afterbirth?
Yeah, the collection of everything.
Collection of everything. Okay, so either the afterbirth or the placenta. So either way, those are things that aren't generally eaten. So if you have in mind to have those outside the right time or outside the right place, that is not going to be pigel, loy pigel. Furthermore, hamolik as a term, you do malika. We know that you don't special way to shaft the bird. You do malika, and not really shafting, but you do fingers, toe and fingers. And hamolik as a torah and lechol beitzehan. You do that. You have in mind eat their eggs outside the right time, outside the right place. Low pigel. Chalav mukdashin ubeitze turin. Ein chayavin mishum pigel v'nosar v'tameh. So the milk that it's in, that's an animal. The milk in the animal. If you want to have that out. You want to have that, or the eggs of the birds. You want to have those outside. Yeah. Right. So this is a case where the animals actually became pigel, and then someone went and consumed the milk in the udder or the unlaid eggs. He's not liable to kares. Because the only way to get kares is to eat the animal that's liable to kares. So, therefore, in this case, you will not get kares. Yeah. So let's say if an animal that's kares, meaning you plan to eat the animal's meat outside the right time, outside the right place. If you go and drink the milk or the unlaid eggs, so that's not going to be high kares because those things don't get kares. Meat. Okay, fine. Now we're up to the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Pigel the Zevach. So you have in mind an animal to eat it or to sacrifice it outside the right time. So what would you say? So here's where his novelty comes. If you have in mind to eat the fetus, it's not going to be pigel. If you have in mind to eat the meat outside the right time, what happens to the fetus? Is that fetus also liable to kares or not? So Amar Belazar, pigel bezevach. If you have to do pigel, you have the wrong intention on the actual sacrifice. Nispagel hasholil, the sholil, the fetus, gets piggled. It also gets subsumed under the prohibition of pigel. However, bisholil, if you have in mind to eat the fetus outside the right time, lo nispagel azevach, the sacrifice will not get piggled. So it goes only one way, not the other way. Meaning once a sacrifice is pigel, so then it extends even to the fetus. However, if you have in mind for the fetus, that's not something which is generally eaten, and therefore the rule is it has to be something which is generally eaten by a person or consumed on the altar. Okay. Pigel ba'olol, you mentioned yesterday, olol, some say is the sinew. So then, pigel ba'olol nispagla mura. So if you have in mind to eat the olol, the sinew, outside the right time, so then nispagla mura, the crop, not like it's the area where all the digestive food goes into. Yeah, like a stomach, I guess. So kind of pocket where the food goes into. Yeah. So once again, the olol is something which is fitting to eat. It's the one of a bird, sinew. It's soft and it could be eaten. However, the mura, the crop, is not. It's just like just waste. It's not really it's not fit to be eaten. So therefore, pigel, same rule. Pigel ba'alol. You have in mind something which is outside the right time, and it's subject to pigel. What happens to the other part of the animal? Does that get piggled or not? Doesn't matter. It does. Nispalga mura. However, b'mura, if you plan to eat the crop outside the right time, so then that's not subject to piggle. So then lo nispagel olo. Then the sinew won't get piggled either. Pigel be'imurin. If you have in mind to eat the imurin, which are the sacrificial parts of the animal, so then now we're talking about now 3 bulls that are unique, that they're called the parim hanisrafim. They get burnt, meaning their meat gets burnt outside of Jerusalem, outside of Yerushalayim. So it's the par of the Kohen Gadol, or the par that when the par Helam Dover, where based off an erroneous ruling, a lot of the congregation follows, or one of the bulls on Yom Kippur. They're called the parim hanisrafim, the ones that get burnt. So now you pigel be'emurin. Now the meat gets burnt outside of Yerushalayim, but the sacrificial parts still get brought up on the outer altar. Just another example of something which one part of it you cannot make it pigel, if you have that in mind, but another part of it is subject to pigel. So when one part of the animal is subject to pigel, does it pigel up the other parts of the animal or not? So, okay. I need to haircut myself. That's why. So okay. So what? When? No. What is that? So pigel be'imurin. You have in mind the sacrificial parts of the burnt bulls; those do get brought up. So if you have the wrong intention there is pigel, and even pigel on the other parts. This paglu parim, the meat of the bulls, gets piggled also. But if you go the other way, it's not going to work. The parim lonis paglu imurim. If you have in mind to eat the meat, which is just burnt, it's never eaten and it's never consumed by the altar. It's burnt outside of Jerusalem. If you have in mind to do that, to eat that, or to burn it outside the right time, that's not going to be piggled, because it has to be something which is usually eaten. It's not eaten. So that's Rabbi Elazar's novelty. When you have animals that have 2 parts to them, one part is subject to piggle, like the sinew of the bird. The other part, like the crop, is not. It's not something which is usually eaten. The part of the burnt bull that gets sacrificed, the part that gets burnt. Whenever you have those 2 parts, even though if you have the one that's not generally eaten in mind, it will not cause piggle. If you have the other one in mind, so then it'll have a ripple effect, and it will piggle the animal too. Okay. You want pickled there? Yeah, G. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to bring proofs and attacks on this Rabbi Elazar, and we'll see how far that takes us. Okay. Lema Misayele, let the following statement be a support for Rabbi Elazar. Vishavim. So there's a discussion. There's a discussion to Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon about exactly where pigel is, how similar it has to be to a korban shlamim. That's where the pigel is stated by the peace offering. Either way, we'll get there hopefully in a week. So Vishavim Shim Chishev V'Achilas Parim U B'Isrei Fasan Lo Asav Lo Klum. They both agree over there, whatever their dispute is, but they both agree that if you think to eat the meat of the bulls, that the meat gets burnt, ubisrei fasan, or you think to burn it outside the right time, you did nothing, because the meat is not eaten and the animal and burning is not subject to piggle. You have to be consuming is subject to piggle and not burning. Fine. So now what are we talking about? Are we not talking about a case where you had in mind to sacrifice the meat, to bring up the sacrificial parts of the animal outside the right time, and then the ripple effect was nispaglu parim? Yeah. So it sounds like Reb Shimon and Nachman argue in a certain case, but they agree that if you have in mind to eat the meat of the burnt bulls, then that's not going to be pickled because that meat is always burnt, not eaten. However, they would disagree though. In the other case, maybe that they would disagree. Yeah, they would disagree in the case where you have in mind to sacrifice the sacrificial parts of the burnt bulls. If you have in mind to do that outside the right time, that will get you piggle, and it'll have a ripple effect on the meat itself. Okay, so if that's true, so then you see that that would be a support for Rabbi Dovid, who says that if you have in mind one thing that is subject to piggle and it becomes piggle, has a ripple effect on the other parts of the animal that are not subject to piggle. So, are they not talking about a case where you have in mind that these sacrificial parts of the animal, you're going to bring it outside the right time, and yet the meat gets piggled? And that's where their debate is. Says the Gemara, no, turn the page, low. Really, it's talking about when you have in mind the sacrificial parts of the burnt bulls, if you have in mind to eat it, to consume it outside the right time, so then what gets piggled? Only that part, those sacrificial parts of the animal. Meaning, you could have learned the dispute in one of two ways. The Gemara thought learned it one way, to which it would be a support for Rabbi Elazar, to which the Gemara says, no, don't read it like that. Actually, read it more limited. They're just talking about that meat. That's not the meat, the sacrificial parts of the burnt bull that gets offered up. If you have in mind to bring that up outside the right time, then that will constitute piggle only for those parts. Yeah. Yeah, and therefore it's no proof to Rabbi Elazar. Okay. Tashma, another brisa. Parim hanisrafim. So the burnt bulls, 3 bulls that the meat gets burnt outside of Jerusalem. Usi'irim hanisrafim, or the or the goats that get burned. So molin bahem mishahuktashu. Once they are sanctified, then there is me'ila. Me'ila is whenever you get benefit from someone which is holy, so you're liable to the prohibition of me'ila. So there is me'ila by them. Okay. Nishchetu, but once they get slaughtered, huksharu lipasel b'tful yom u b'mechusar kippurim u b'lina. So once these animals get slaughtered, they're able to be invalidated by a tful yom, someone who's impure went to the mikvah waiting for sunset, or by mechusar kippurim, someone who's just waiting to bring his sacrifice to be pure, that's like a metzora, or b'lina. If you leave the meat overnight, they'll be subject to a prohibition called lina. So lina is to sleep, one to sleep. So when you leave it overnight, it sort of sleeps overnight. So that's also prohibition. It becomes, I believe it becomes no sir. Okay, so now, those are 3 things that happen. Once the animals are slaughtered, they will be invalidated in these 3 cases. Fine. Says the Gemara, Ma'ilav Alina's basar. Are we not talking about that if you leave it overnight, it becomes invalid? And not only if you leave it overnight, the Shmamina, Migo de Pasla Balina, Pasla Baba Makshava. Not only if you leave it overnight, but even if you have a thought to leave it overnight. Okay, and if that would be true, so then what? Yeah, so we're talking about these bulls that are usually the meat is burnt, and now we're saying that maybe the Bryce is referring to a case where you have in mind to leave the meat overnight, meaning it sounds like if you read it this way that there is piggle, which applies even to the meat which is generally burnt, and that we just said is not true. Yeah, so how would you invalidate this animal with pigul? Like the method of Rabbi Dovid. You would have in mind to eat the sacrificial parts outside the right time, and that would have a ripple effect on the meat. So is that not what we're talking about? And if that is what we're talking about, then it'd be a support for Rabbi Dovid. Says the Gemara, "Lo, linas emurim." We're talking about when it talks about leaving it overnight, it's referring to the sacrificial parts of the meat and not the meat itself. So these burnt bulls have two parts of them. The sacrificial parts, like the kidneys and like the liver, things like that, get burnt up on the outer altar. The meat gets burned outside of Jerusalem. So we're trying to figure out if you invalidate the sacrificial parts by having a wrong intention, does that affect the meat? So yeah, says the Gemara, no, it's not approved. Okay. But the end of that brisa, Hamidikatani Seifa, Kulan Molin Bahan. It says at the end of that brisa that all of these things are subject to me'ilah, getting inappropriate to get a benefit which is not allowed from them. So Molin Bahan al Beis Hadeshen ad sheyutach habasar. It says there until it goes up on the Beis Hadeshen, on the pyre, on the ashes, and it gets fully burnt. Once it gets fully burnt, so then there's no more me'ilah. Once it's fully burnt. But what do you see? What's the topic of conversation at the end of the brisa? The meat. The meat, you get me'ilah until it's fully burnt. So now, the end of the brisa, the subject is the meat. It would make sense that the beginning of the brisa subject is talking about the meat also. And if that would be true, then it sounds like the implication would be that you have pigul when you have the wrong intention for the sacrificial parts, it'll spill over and cause the meat to be pigul. Says the Gemara, meaty area. Not every time that the latter part of a brisa is talking about X, is the former part of the brisa talking about X also. Meaty area, who says that talking about the same thing? The end of the brisa is talking about the meat, and the beginning of the brisa is talking about the sacrificial parts. You can have that. Reisha emurim v'seva basar. The beginning that's talking about, which was our implication that there's pigul, was talking about the sacrificial parts. Seifa, the end, was talking about basar, and therefore we don't have a proof one way or another. It's not a support for Belazar. So two attempted supports, and now one attack. Masiv Rabba. Rabba has an attack. The Elu she'ein mefaglin, the ein mispaglin. So ein mefaglin is an active. The followings don't, you cannot make them pigul, and mispaglin is in the passive. It cannot become pigul. So what things are excluded from pigul entirely? You can't become pigul. You can't, having a wrong intent for this doesn't create pigul, and there is no ripple effect on you either. So here's the whole list of cases. So tsemer sheberoshe pasim, the wool that is on the sheep, v'sa'ar shebezakin tayashim, and the hair that's on the beard of the goats, v'ha'or, and the skins, and the rotative, and the gravy, and the kippah is the residue, right? Yeah, the sediment, and the alal is the sinew, the hamura is the prop, the atzamos are the bones, the hagidim are the other sinews. Thank you. The akaranim are the horns. The talafim are the hooves. Good, thank you. The shalil is the fetus. The shilya is the afterbirth or placenta or everything, whatever. Yeah. So the chalav, the chalav, hamukdashin, or the milk in the udder, or beit turin, or the unripe eggs, the eggs that are inside the bird. All of these things, lo mifagman, if you have in mind, I'm going to use the wool of the sheep to sew my blanket, whatever, outside the right time. That's not pigul. Or if you have in mind a good pigul thought, meaning not a good one, but a bad pigul thought, bad meaning it's a good pigul thought, meaning you have in mind that you're going to have the animal outside the right time. What happens to the wool? I'm going to eat the sheep meat outside the right time. Does its wool become liable and kares if you use it? Says the Brisa, no. All these things you cannot make pickle with them, and they don't get affected either when you have a pickle intent on that animal. Kulan, all of them. Lo mefaglin, below mispaglin. There is no pickle by them. Yeah, even though they're attached to the animal, but it doesn't matter. There's no pickle by them. Okay. The ein chayav alan mishum pickle no servatame. Also, these things are not subject to pickle. No sir leaving it past its prescribed time, a day and a night, or 2 days sometimes, or betame, touching the animal or touching it won't cause tuma, impurity on the other parts of the animal. Fine. The hamala bahan bachutz putter. If you bring them outside the ohel moed, where the altar is, outside the courtyard, you're exempt, because these things are not the things that are liable that you're going to bring up as an offering. So, what's the case? So we said they're not subject to pickle; they don't become pickle. What are we talking about? Sounds like they'll never become pickle. Meaning, even if you have an animal like the sheep, and you have in mind that you're going to eat the meat after its prescribed time, the other parts of the animal will not get pickled. Rabbi Lazar said, if you have the wrong intent for one part of the animal, then it will get pickled. So, says the Gemara, sounds like lo mefaglin hazeva. You can't make it pickle. Below mispaglin machmas zeva. And even if you have the wrong intent for the meat of the animal, but these things, the wool and the fetus, all these things are not going to become pickled. Yeah. So, okay, that's against Rabbi Lazar. Yeah. Says Gemara, lo mifaglin as a zevach, velo mispaglin machmas atzman. So, you cannot create pickle if you have in mind to eat the fetus outside the right time, or to use the wool outside the right time, or the hair of the beard of the goat outside the right time. That doesn't create pickle. And below mispaglin machmas atzman. And lo mispaglin machmas atzman. What's between these two? Ein mefaglin as a zevach. Yeah, so if you, let's say you throw the blood to eat or to offer up any of these things outside the right time, the sacrifice will be kosher. It'll be good. Below mispaglin machmas as zevach. So, sorry, and once again, if you have in mind to throw if you have in mind a pickle intent, these things won't become pickle. And furthermore, if you have in mind, if you throw the blood on condition for one of these things to happen, you're going to use the goat hair. So then they don't become pickle either. So those are the two cases, that they don't create pickle for the animal, and if you have in mind that you're going to do one of these things outside the right time. So basically, you could have, I guess, 3 permutations. One is you want to eat the classic case. You want to eat the meat outside the right time. That's pickle, but does it affect the fetus or not? That's one case. That Rabbi Dovid says it does. Okay, case number 2 is you have in mind, you have in mind to throw the blood on condition to sacrifice up the hairs of the goat. So that's not going to be pickle. That's number 2. Or number 3 is if you or number 3 is what? Machmas atzman, if you, yes, correct. Okay. One is you have in mind to, let's say, offer up the hairs of the goat outside the right time. So what happens now? Nothing. The animal doesn't become pickle, and even they themselves, those parts of the animal aren't pickle either, because the thought is like a 0. It's like you thought nothing. It doesn't do anything. So you have really 3 cases. One is you have in mind to eat the meat outside the right time, that's pigel. Does it or does it not affect all these other parts? Rabbi Dovid says it does. The brisa we thought was a question because it says that it doesn't. To which we're saying, no, really Rabbi Dovid is right. It does. What's the brisa talking about? If you have in mind, let's say, to consume the goat hairs outside the right time, that won't create pigel for the animal, and it won't create pigel for itself either. It's a zero. It's a zero on all fronts. That's all it's saying. But it was never talking about a regular case of pigel. Does that or does it not have a ripple effect on this? That it wasn't talking about. Therefore, it's not a question on Rabbi Dovid. Okay. So, says the Gemara, if that's true, look at the latter part of the brisa. Kulan lo mefaglin, v'lo mispaglin. Hasulamali. There's the end of the brisa has a repetition. It says these things don't cause pigel and they don't become pigel. So, what's it adding? Is it not adding the case of a Lazar? That meaning it's adding something. So, according to you, at the beginning of the brisa was not talking about having a ripple effect. When the brisa repeats itself at the end, what's repetition for? Is the repetition not for the ripple effect case, where you have in mind to eat the meat outside the right time, and now it's going to have a ripple effect on all these other external parts of the animal, and therefore it really is a question on Rabbi Dovid? Says the Gemara, well, basically, you want to tell me that there's one part of the brisa that's repetitive, and therefore tell me it must be including the case that's a question on Rabbi Dovid. What if I bring you another part of the brisa that also seems to be repetitive? What are you going to conclude? Either the brisa is repetitive, or it's not. So, according to your reasoning that you picked up on the end of the brisa and called it repetitive, the beginning of the brisa it says Ein chayav alav mishum pigel hasulamali. That statement's also repetitive. You're not liable for pigel. Rather, what are you going to say? Ela aidi debai lemisni no sarvetame tana pigel. You'll tell me the reason why I mentioned pigel, which seems to be repetitive, is because it was teaching me the other cases of nosar and tame, and it threw in pigel too, right? So the beginning of the brisa told you all these things that are not pigel. Then the brisa that we have here in front of us ended off saying all these things ein chayav alad mishum pigel. Just that's repetitive. Says Gemara, yeah, but that last part of the brisa that was talking about the milk of the udder and the eggs in the bird, it said you're not liable for pigel, nosar and tame. Nosar and tame we never mentioned before in the brisa, so that is not repetitive. Pigel was just mentioned. Agav, what's agav? Mentioned along with those other invalidations, but therefore it's not repetitive. It got pulled along for the ride. So therefore, once again, you told me that the end of the brisa is repetitive. I'm telling you that, well, what about this part of the brisa? Is that not repetitive? So which you'll answer me, no. That's just because it mentioned no sar and tame. It has to mention pigel too. So says the Gemara, El aidi debaidi lemisne no sar and tame tana pigel. Hachanami. So to the end of the brisa, debai lemisne hamala mehen b'chutz. It talked about a case where you have to, if you take all these parts outside, that there's no violation because they're all things that don't have that restriction. Tananami v'chul lo mefaglin v'lo mispaglin. That basically at the end we taught you that if you take these things outside of the temple, there's no violation. So once we mentioned taking something outside, we also threw in parenthetically that there's no pigel there too. But it was just it just came along for the ride, so to speak. Once it mentioned the violation of taking it outside, it mentioned the violation of pigel. Once it mentioned the violation of tameh and osar, it mentioned about the violation of pigel. But you can't imply from there or infer from there that it's a totally redundant statement, which must be including a specific case of pigel, and therefore ask a question on me. It was just things that are they came along. They got dragged along for the ride. They slept along for the ride. Yeah, slept. They got slept. Okay. No, it has when it talks about Kenyan agav, it has a good word. Indinto or something like that. Okay. Then by dint of, yeah, exactly. The words are so good, no one remembers them. Yeah. So Rava Amar, okay. So Rava says, Af ana nami tanina. Rava says, I also have a brisa to the Mishnah is going to support this. Let's see. Af ana nami tanina. Our Mishnah said, Hashochedes hamukdashim. You are slaughtering the holy parts of the animal to eat the fetus or the afterbirth, b'chutz, to eat them outside the right place. Low pigel. There's no pigel because so let's see. Standard, there's no pigel. Hamolik esatorim, or you do the malika, the way you kasher the bird. Hamolik eshaturim lechol beitzeim. You want to eat their eggs outside the right place. Low pigel. There's no pigel there. The Hadar Tanya, and then it said, Cholav hamukdashim or beitzei turim ein chayav lev mishum pigel no servetame. Sounds like for the milk and the udder and the eggs, there's no pigel, no sar or tame. But for the fetus and the afterbirth, you are chayavin. You are chayav for pigel. So elalav shmamina kan machmas azevach kan machmas atzman shmamina. So what are the two cases? Meaning the first case says that there's no pigel on the fetus. And the implication of the last case is that there is pigel by the fetus. So what are you going to say? One is when you're having in mind the actual parts of the animal and you have in mind those to eat outside the right time, then there will be a ripple effect on the fetus. The other one is when you're having in mind to eat the fetus outside the right place, that there's not going to be pigel. So at the end of the day, we go with Rabbi Lazar, and seems to be a good support from our Mishnah that a ripple effect exists. If you have things that they themselves, a wrong thought about them, cannot be the cause of pigel, however, they could still get a ripple effect of pigel. So all these fetuses and hairs, or the fetuses, let's say the fetus, that if you have in mind to eat the fetus outside the right time, it's not going to cause pigel. But if you have in mind to eat the meat outside the right time, that is pigel, and will have a ripple effect even on all these parts, such as the fetus. Okay. That's that. I think it's now a new discussion, I believe. So I don't know if it's fully new, but let's see. So Tanan Hasan, the Mishnah, coming up in I don't know, 40 days. So 50 days. Yeah. So Tanan Hasan, Ubali Mumin. Animals that have a blemish, Rabbi Lazar Makshir, the Bali Mumin. Let's say you put up a blemished animal up on the altar. You got to take it off or you can keep it on. So excuse me, Rabbi Kiva says you can keep it on. Rabbi Kiva Makshir Bali Mumin. Amar Rabbi Kiva Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Hitcher Rabbi Kiva Ella, Bedukin Shaba'ayin, Ho Vikshayin Ba'ofos. Yeah, the blemish he's talking about are a very minute blemish. A cataract blemish or something in the pupil of the eye, minor blemishes. Since by birds they're not considered blemishes, by an animal you can, if you put it up, then you don't have to take it down. However, one stipulation, v'hu shekadam higdishan es muman, only if the animal was sanctified first, and then it developed a blemish, but not the other way around. Yeah, if it first got a blemish before it was sanctified, so then it never receives the full sanctity of an animal that can be offered up on the temple. It'll only receive a lower level of sanctity of an animal which we care about its monetary value, not its intrinsic sanctity. So if you take an animal that has a blemish, and you say, I want to bring this as a korban, as a sacrifice, you can't bring it as a sacrifice. What do? The monetary value of it is now holy, and you'll donate to the Beis HaMikdash. But the animal itself is blemished. It doesn't get that full sanctity. Okay, so fine. Rabbi Akiva though agrees. Mother Rabbi Akiva, be'olas nekeva. So now in ola, the offering that's fully consumed has to be a male. It can't be a female animal. Rabbi Akiva agrees that if you offer up a female animal onto the altar, so that's the same as like getting a blemish first, and therefore it's a no-go, and you have to take it, and you have to bring a new one or take it off. the command kadim muma lehigdesha, because it was never ever fit to be brought as an ola, a female animal. So that's the same as having a blemish first and then sanctifying it. Fine. That is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. How do you get off the altar? What do you have to do?
No, I mean, this is
Scoop it up?
the alternate thing.
How do you get off the altar? Donna Connor question. Yeah. After you've cleaned your pants from all the blood, how do you get off the altar now? Yeah. So okay. Okay. So now let's see. So Masi Rabbi Zera Hamala Mehen B'chutz Patur. If you offer these things up outside, so then they are. Sorry, we're going back on that previous brisa now. That brisa that we just brought of all those hairs of the goats and the wool of the sheep, all those things. If you bring them outside the altar, so then there's nothing wrong with it because those parts are not the meat that has to stay inside. It's the external parts. So what is that? If you bring like the wool or the hair outside of the courtyard, it's not going to invalidate it. So, okay. Yeah. Meaning you could have thought it's part of the animal. You could have thought that the hair is part of the animal, but just like the animal has restrictions, that has restrictions too. So, fine. So what's that have to do with us? Let's see. Hamala mehen b'chutz patur. Okay. If you bring them outside, you're exempt. But ha me'iman chayiv. But if you bring it up from their mother, no. Meaning they themselves are going to be invalid. However, it sounds like the meat, though, meaning these things are invalid, but ha basar iman chayiv. It's a case of basar iman. But the meat of their mother, if you bring that outside, then you're going to be liable. Okay. What's wrong with that? Oh, because, 1 second, this is why. Why are we talking about it? Okay. So, Veheichi Mishkachasla. What do the two things have to do with each other? Rabbi Akiva says, and Olas Nekeva, you got to take it off. The Brisa says, if you bring these things outside, so then you're not liable. Okay. That's true. What Shach is doing, Olas Nekeva.
Because if it had a baby, then it's really female. Every time we bring the blood outside.
Meaning you bring the blood outside, and it's going to be fine, but it sounds like the meat of the mother, that's not going to be, then that would be an invalidation. If you bring the meat of the mother, it would be an invalidation. So if you have a fetus of let's say the Olas Nekeva gave birth, and the previous brisa said that bringing a fetus outside is going to be fine. It's not going to be an invalidation. However, it sounds like the fetus won't be an invalidation, but the meat of the mother will be an invalidation. And we're going to stop from here tomorrow.